Welcome to the Green Lake Association's first ever virtual annual meeting, which gives us the opportunity to tell more people than we ever have before about Green Lake's challenges and what we're doing about it. If you're hearing about the GLA for the first time, we're a nonprofit organization whose entire mission is focused on protecting, improving, and one day ultimately restoring Green Lake to a clean, healthy, oligotrophic lake. If you're an active GLA member, don't forget to visit our website, greenlakeassociation.org, to vote on meeting minutes from last year, as well as 4 new board members who have stepped up: Sharon Dolan, Rick Wilson, Bill Mulligan, and Jeff Shattuck. I want to thank these new board members, all of our board members who are serving for many years, as well as our dedicated staff for their tireless work and passion on behalf of Green Lake. One final announcement before we get started: mark your calendars for August 1st for our Shine a Light event, which is being held in lieu of our annual gala. This is an opportunity for us to come together and celebrate what we can do on behalf of Green Lake and Green Lake's brighter future. You can see event details soon at greenlakeassociation.org. But before we begin, let's just take a minute to breathe in some fresh Green Lake air. 2020 has been a haul. I don't know how 6 decades have been packed into 6 months, but I can tell you that I've looked to Green Lake for a sense of hope and stability and reassurance lately. This spring in particular, I remember hearing honking geese migrating overhead, and just hearing that annual migration continue made me think, thank goodness for Green Lake. We're not the only ones to look to Green Lake for comfort and solace, and we won't be the last. Green Lake has been cherished by humans for thousands of years, and for a tiny slice of that time, 69 years to be exact, the Green Lake Association has been dedicated and devoted to protecting and preserving this priceless natural resource. Generations before have looked to Green Lake for comfort and solace, and generations forward will look to that too. And that really is our 2020 vision, that generations in the future can look to Green Lake just like we're looking to it now for comfort. And so yes, when so much is changing in 2020, we look to Green Lake for stability. But the truth is that Green Lake is changing. All of those who have lived a lifetime on Green Lake will tell you that the lake that they knew in their childhood is not the lake that they know now. We didn't used to have filamentous algae or zebra mussels. We didn't used to have islands of duckweed that would get pushed from the Silver Creek estuary into Green Lake after a big rainstorm. Green Lake is freezing later, and it's freezing less. So yes, Green Lake is changing. The GLA is carefully watching these trends with a growing sense of urgency and concern. And because you're watching today, I know that you feel that sense of urgency too. Every year, the Green Lake Association conducts a series of projects dedicated on protecting water quality in the lake. And these are all aimed at restoring Big Green Lake to a clean, healthy, oligotrophic lake. And these projects, like stream restoration and invasive species removal and agricultural education, are all helping to keep nutrient pollution on the land and out of the water. Once pollutions wash off the landscape and into the lake, they can fuel weed and algae growth, increase the likelihood of blue-green algae blooms, and they also contribute to Green Lake's low dissolved oxygen dead zone, which you're going to be hearing about more later. And what we have learned in all of this is that Green Lake's complex problems are going to require a complex solution. We can't just copy and paste something that worked in another lake here in Green Lake and expect the same results. While all of the projects that the GLA completes are scientifically proven to protect water quality, recent measurements have shown that we're not hitting the mark. The Green Lake Association and our lake management partners plan on, hope for, a 2% reduction in phosphorus loading every year. But recent measurements have shown that despite our best efforts, we've seen a 25% phosphorus loading increase since 2015. So Green Lake is on a metaphorical treadmill. And phosphorus loading and more intense, more frequent rain events are the speed dial. So what that means is that we have to do more and more just to keep in the same place. And we're feeling that pressure here at the GLA. But what that means is we're more dedicated than ever to protecting Green Lake's water quality. No matter what the challenges Green Lake is facing, now or in the future. The GLA is focused on science-based solutions that work. The lake is too important to you, to our families, to our community, to future generations to not keep working diligently to protect it. An impressive amount of work has been done, thanks to all of you, to our supporters and our members, but we know that we have more to do on behalf of Green Lake. We want to build on these accomplishments at a scale that's proportional to the lake's challenges, motivated by a deep commitment to future generations. We recognize that we have to do more faster for the lake that's at the heart of our communities. But we also know that we might have to do things differently. We might have to try new solutions. We might have to test new technologies that will catapult our progress by leaps and bounds. That means we're engaging researchers and partners across the region. We're relying on strong partnerships with our lake management partners, and we're also looking at the entire lake system to establish a restoration framework that's consistent with the scale of Green Lake's challenges. Today, you are going to hear from two researchers who are doing work right here on Green Lake to help us find solutions that work for water quality. First, you're going to hear from Rachel Johnson, the UW-Madison graduate student in biological systems engineering, who has been looking at something called legacy phosphorus. So you'll learn what that's about and how she's sort of a phosphorus accountant. We're also going to hear from Cory McDonald, a professor at Michigan Technological University. Cory has been working closely with the U.S. Geological Survey on a research project looking at Green Lake's dissolved oxygen dead zone, which is the reason that Green Lake is impaired. I mentioned in the beginning of my comments about our 2020 vision of creating a cleaner, healthier Green Lake so that future generations can look to Green Lake for abundance and solace. And that's been important for so many of us this year. But I've also been thinking about hindsight because that's 2022. And I often think 50 years from now, what do we wish that we would have started this year to protect Green Lake's water quality? There's no doubt 2020 is a year of change. I invite all of you to join the GLA in using that catalyst of change to double down on investing in what really matters, in our commitment to progress on behalf of Green Lake's water quality. Not only are we counting on it, but future generations are too. So I hope you enjoy today's program. Stay tuned for some speed talks from experts working right here in Green Lake on research and solutions. You'll also hear from DeLucenay, who is chair of the GLA board. So until we meet again, stay happy, stay healthy, and we'll see you at the lake soon. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Rachel Johnson. Rachel is a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison within the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies. And Rachel has been working really hard on a legacy phosphorus project over the past several years that she's going to talk with us about. Take it away, Rachel.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachel and I'm an environmental engineering graduate student at UW-Madison. I first attended the Green Lake Association annual meeting back in 2017 with my advisor, Anita Thompson. In the years since, I've enjoyed coming back, and today I'm really glad to be here with you virtually to share some of my research with this talk, What's the Fuss with Legacy Phosphorus? Before starting, I want to acknowledge that Green Lake, or Dechala as it was called, is the ancestral and unceded land of the Ho-Chunk people. This is part of our history. To learn more about the Ho-Chunk people, visit wisconsinfirstnations.org. I want to start my talk with a picture. This is a place that's incredibly special to me and where my love of lakes started. In the picture, you can see it's a lovely summer day, and at the end of the dock, there's a gray-haired woman sitting watching kids swim. What you can't see, though, is the thick scum in the water and the weeds growing to the surface. My cousins and I are floating on mats, doing our best to avoid them. This is Lake Pulaski, a lake in central Minnesota. My great-aunt, who's sitting watching us while we swim, spent her childhood summers here. Over her 90 years, she saw immense changes to this place. Farmland turning into cabins, cabins into bigger houses, septic systems into city sewers, massive flooding, and increasingly worse and worse water quality. And this is a familiar story for many lakes in cabin country, including Green Lake. Like the lake where I grew up, Green Lake has had declining water quality over the past several decades, and it's tied to too much phosphorus. As a researcher, I became interested in history. How did we get here? And what's it going to take for it to get better? When I looked at research from other lakes and watersheds that have persistent phosphorus issues, I started to see this word, legacy phosphorus. Simply put, legacy phosphorus is historical phosphorus. It's the phosphorus that was added to the Green Lake watershed in 1930 or 1964 or 2016 that stuck around. Now, phosphorus in itself is good. It's essential for all life. But we can have too much of a good thing. Through human activities and actions, we've added too much phosphorus to some places. And then rain washes it from yards and fields into storm sewers and streams. Then, when phosphorus gets into lakes, it fuels excess plant and algae growth, low oxygen, fish kills, and poor water quality. Now, Green Lake has been very active since the 1980s in trying to prevent phosphorus from getting into the lake. But despite all that incredible work, we haven't seen the major improvements in water quality that were hoped for, and this might be related to legacy phosphorus. So here's an example of how legacy phosphorus might delay improvements in water quality. Let's say we have a cornfield that we add fertilizer to. The corn can't use all of the phosphorus from the fertilizer, so the extra sits there, attached to soil particles, and it stays as more corn is planted and more fertilizer is added. Then, maybe 1 or 2 decades later, during a rainy August, the legacy phosphorus attached to the soil gets washed into Silver Creek. It flows downstream until it gets trapped on a stream bank. And it stays there for another few decades until floodwaters from a very snowy winter carry the legacy phosphorus into Green Lake. So it might be 2020 and we're just seeing the phosphorus from the cornfield reach the lake, phosphorus that originated many decades ago. Now, this is just an example, but it shows what makes legacy phosphorus so frustrating. When we measure water quality in the streams coming into Green Lake, we don't know whether the phosphorus is from today or several decades ago. And because legacy phosphorus slowly leaks from the landscape, it can make it look like management actions aren't effective. It hides the good work that's been done. So how do we know how much legacy phosphorus is in the land around Green Lake? Phosphorus is tricky. We can't see it, but we know that it's there. In my research, I'm kind of like an accountant for Green Lake, but rather than tracking money, I track phosphorus. And the watershed is the bank account. For each year of the study, I calculate how much phosphorus entered the account and how much left. For the last year of my study, 2017, I'm going to talk through the ways that phosphorus got added to the Green Lake watershed, from smallest to largest. And starting in 7th place, we have wastewater treatment plants. Areas in the cities of Ripon and Green Lake that have sewers send wastewater to treatment plants. Much of the phosphorus is removed, and the small amount that's left goes into streams as effluent. In 6th place is a surprising one. Dog waste. Yes, dog poop contributes phosphorus, especially when it's not picked up. 5th place, we have non-farm fertilizer. Fertilizer is added to lawns to promote growth and does contain phosphorus sometimes. 4th place was a tie between pesticides and septic systems. Some pesticides, including Roundup, are phosphorus-based, and septic systems process human waste in areas not connected to sewers. These systems only remove some of the phosphorus, and the rest slowly filters into the soil. In the top 3, we have the atmosphere. Wind and rain carry phosphorus from other areas into the watershed. Most of the phosphorus originates from erosion and the burning of fossil fuels. And number 2, manure from dairy cows and beef cattle. And finally, the largest source to the watershed in 2017 was agricultural fertilizer. Plants need phosphorus to grow, and fertilizer is essential for growing food. Now, phosphorus also leaves the Green Lake watershed each year. In 2017, the smallest removal of phosphorus was from the harvesting of aquatic weeds. Now, this is mostly done because the weeds are a nuisance, but they do remove some phosphorus. Number 6 is carp removal. Like weeds, carp are a nuisance, as you all know, and they remove a small amount of phosphorus. The next largest was wastewater. For the buildings around Green Lake, the small amount of phosphorus that isn't processed by the wastewater treatment plant actually goes into the Fox River outside of the watershed. Next up is deer hunting. Yes, when deer are killed, the phosphorus in their bodies leaves the watershed. The third largest removal of phosphorus is the Puckian River, which goes through the city of Green Lake and is the outlet of the lake. Now the top two, we have animal products. Things like milk and eggs contain phosphorus. And finally, the largest removal of phosphorus was the harvesting of crops. So, as a phosphorus accountant, I then subtract the removals from the additions, and I know how much legacy phosphorus stayed in the watershed. I'm going back and doing this for the past several decades, and when I do that, it becomes clear that we are building up legacy phosphorus in the Green Lake watershed. Each year, if our budget isn't balanced, if we add more than can be used or removed, it adds up. And since it took decades to create today's legacy phosphorus problem, it will take decades to address it. Now, my research will wrap up this fall, and I hope that it will help watershed managers understand where phosphorus can be used more efficiently, know where legacy phosphorus has moved, and think about scenarios for ultimately reducing legacy phosphorus. In the meantime, though, I do want to share a few ideas for what we can do to address legacy phosphorus for Green Lake, and these build upon work that the Green Lake Association and many of you are already doing. The first is that we can keep working to reduce current sources of phosphorus. What we do today will either create or prevent tomorrow's legacy phosphorus issues. Individually, this could mean avoiding lawn fertilizers with phosphorus, being vigilant about picking up pet waste, and maintaining and fixing leaky septic systems. At a watershed scale, this could mean considering phosphorus in pesticides and manure before adding fertilizer. We can also keep working to draw down legacy phosphorus stores. To truly address legacy phosphorus, there also just needs to be less of it. Individually, this could look like planting native vegetation with long root systems in yards, or putting in shoreline restorations that will help take up phosphorus. At a bigger scale, this might look like recycling phosphorus-rich sediment as fertilizer, or utilizing phosphorus already stored in the soil as a free source of fertilizer to crops. We can also keep preventing legacy phosphorus from getting into Green Lake and its streams. If it's already there, we need to trap it on the landscape so it doesn't get to the lake. Individually, this could be preventing erosion on properties and construction sites, and sweeping debris out of gutters so it doesn't get into storm drains. As a watershed community, this means things like planting buffer strips and addressing eroding stream banks. Unfortunately, there's no silver bullet. It will take many different management practices across a wide area. We know that legacy phosphorus can hide the good benefits of management actions, so we need to be patient and realistic. Green Lake is already ahead of the game in addressing legacy phosphorus. With an active lake association, committed land conservation departments, municipalities, and agencies, and all of you who showed up today, Green Lake has the ingredients to be successful. The work is not done, but I'm confident that what's done today will leave a positive legacy for future generations. Thank you for listening to my talk.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Up next is Cory McDonald. Cory is a professor at Michigan Technological University who's been working on a research study for several years looking at Green Lake's low dissolved oxygen zone.
Hi, I'm Cory McDonald. I'm an assistant professor of environmental engineering at Michigan Technological University. I'm going to talk about a project that I've been working with the Green Lake Association on to understand the metalimnetic oxygen minimum in the lake. So to start, let's talk about what exactly a metalimnetic oxygen minimum is. During the summertime, deep lakes tend to stratify thermally, meaning there's a layer of warm water that sits on top of a layer of cold water, and there's little mixing between these two. The boundary between these two layers is known as the metalimnion. A typical oxygen profile in a stratified lake will look like this, where oxygen levels are highest in the surface layer and then decrease with depth. In Green Lake, on the other hand, the oxygen profile looks like this, with a pronounced minimum in oxygen occurring right in the region of the metalimnion. Now, this type of oxygen minimum, while rare, has been documented elsewhere. And typically, the types of systems we see these in are very large, very deep lakes, much like Big Green Lake. And it's not a new phenomenon in Green Lake either. We actually have data going back to the early 1900s showing that even then, this metalimnetic oxygen minimum did exist, though it wasn't nearly as severe as it is today. So more recent data collected by the U.S. Geological Survey over the past couple decades have suggested that the minimum is getting worse over time. In other words, those oxygen concentrations are getting lower at that layer of the lake over time. So 5 milligrams per liter is considered sort of a minimum level for a healthy aquatic ecosystem. The oxygen minimum in Green Lake routinely goes below this now, in some years approaching even 0 milligrams per liter. So because of this, the lake is now listed as impaired by the Wisconsin DNR for having these very low oxygen levels in the middle of the water column. To understand our approach to studying the oxygen minimum in Green Lake, we need to think about the major processes that control the amount of dissolved oxygen in the water. Sunlight can only penetrate so far into the water column. We refer to this layer of water that has enough light for photosynthesis to occur as the photic zone. In Green Lake, this depth varies seasonally from 6 to over 10 meters. The major photosynthetic organisms in the lake are phytoplankton, or algae. These organisms take up dissolved carbon dioxide from the lake and release dissolved oxygen, which increases oxygen levels in the water. On the other hand, the consumers in the lake, microbes, zooplankton, and fish, all carry out the same process of respiration that we do, taking up dissolved oxygen from the water and releasing carbon dioxide. In addition, because the surface layer of the lake is in contact with the atmosphere, there's a constant exchange of gases across this boundary, and of course oxygen is abundant in the atmosphere. So all of these processes in the surface waters form a balanced system, so that there tends to always be sufficient concentrations of oxygen in the surface layers of the lake. At greater depths, however, in other words below the photic zone, photosynthesis can no longer occur, meaning that oxygen is not being added to the water through that pathway. In addition, thermal stratification prevents the colder, deeper waters from accessing atmospheric oxygen. However, consumers still eat in the dark, so the respiration process continues to consume dissolved oxygen, which over time can lead to very low oxygen levels. Because light availability also changes over time between night and day, we can actually see fluctuations in oxygen levels in the surface over a 24-hour period. During the day, when photosynthesis is occurring, oxygen levels go up, and during the night they fall again as organisms consume the added oxygen. Below the photic zone, however, we do not see those daily cycles, rather just a steady decrease in oxygen levels over time. In 2017, we began a study to determine the causes of the metalimnetic oxygen minimum in Green Lake. The centerpiece of this effort was 2 monitoring buoys, one in each end of the lake. Each mooring supported a string of sensors that measured oxygen concentrations and temperatures throughout the season at 10-minute intervals. Here you can see some members of the project team during deployment. That's Dale Robertson and Ben Siebers of the U.S. Geological Survey on the left, my graduate student Mata Naziri Saeed in the middle, and myself on the right. Many of you may have noticed these out on the lake in 2017 and 18. There were just these standard marker buoys at the surface. Below the water, however, was an array of sensors reaching down to about 25 meters. This is the type of information we gathered with those sensors. Each line here represents the concentration of dissolved oxygen over time at a different depth in the lake. The vertical dashed line represents the approximate time at which the lake became thermally stratified. In other words, a distinct warm surface layer became present above a cold, deeper layer. The black line represents measurements at the surface. Notice this regular oscillation. This is the daily cycle of photosynthesis I just described. And having these high-frequency data actually allows us to calculate how that changes from one day to the next. The jaggedness in the data from the deeper layers is caused by internal waves within the lake. Notice that over time, concentrations remain fairly stable at the surface, while they decrease steadily at greater depths. The rate of decrease, however, is different at different depths, and determining exactly why that is our primary goal. Here you can clearly see the oxygen minimum occurred around 13 meters with a minimum concentration of less than 2 milligrams per liter. We developed a purpose-built simulation model to interpret the data collected by the buoys. This model includes not only the biological and air-water exchange processes that we've talked about here, but also the physics of the lake, in other words, the heat budget and vertical water movement. The color maps on the left show the measurements on top and the model output on the bottom, where the color corresponds to the oxygen concentration. The vertical dimension is depth, with the surface being the top of the plot, and the horizontal dimension represents time. On the right is a slightly different way of comparing model output to measurements, with each of the two lines representing the vertical profile of oxygen in the water column, animated through time. So at this point, we're pretty satisfied with how our model is performing, and we're currently using it to run different scenarios to figure out both, what exactly are the drivers, the physical and biological causes of this oxygen minimum, and then more importantly, what can be done about it. And what our preliminary results are suggesting is that there's two really important factors here. The first is just temperature. So this consumption of oxygen by biological processes, respiration, is really highly dependent on temperature, and the relatively warmer waters in that metalimnetic region allow that to happen a little faster than it does elsewhere, and cause that minimum to occur. So, that really makes sense in terms of the historical data, in terms of explaining why there was some evidence of a metalimnetic oxygen minimum even 100 years ago. I would say it seems like it's likely just a natural feature of this very deep lake. Now, on the other hand, the severity of the oxygen minimum, which we know is becoming worse over time, that seems to be linked to what happens in the lake in the early spring. So this was a sort of counterintuitive result. The lowest oxygen concentrations occur later in the year, late summer, early fall. And what we're finding is they don't seem to be linked so much to what's happening in the surface of the lake through the summer, but the stage is really set by how much algal growth and productivity occurs in the spring. So we've made that linkage, and what we're working on now is trying to figure out, okay, well, how much do we need to reduce that springtime productivity to ensure that those oxygen levels don't fall below 5 milligrams per liter later in the year. We don't know exactly what that answer will be yet, but what we do know is the way to get there, of course, is ultimately through reducing the amount of nutrients coming into the lake. So that's a quick update on our oxygen study. This will be wrapping up and final reporting done this year. I want to thank Stephanie and the team at GLA for inviting me to be part of your annual meeting, and thanks to all of you for taking an active interest in the health of your beautiful lake.
Thanks, Cory. And finally, to close out our first ever virtual annual meeting, it is my pleasure to introduce Kent DeLucenay. Kent is chair of the GLA board, and he throws his heart and soul and tireless efforts into his work on behalf of Green Lake. Kent's going to share a few final comments with us, and I want to again thank you so much for joining us at our annual meeting, and we hope to see you soon.
I want to say thank you to all of you for joining the Green Lake Association on our first ever virtual annual meeting. We're certainly going to miss the opportunity to have coffee with all of you, to catch up, to find out how your winter was like we do normally at our annual meeting and on a Saturday morning in Town Square. But we really are pleased to have had the opportunity to talk to you about some of the projects that we have underway. You know, we're all reeling from the effects of the pandemic. Some have faced really tragic outcomes, some have faced dire economic circumstances, and some of us have just found our lives to be inconvenienced, hankering to return to normal. What I want to tell all of you, our members and our supporters, is the Green Lake Association, our staff, our board of directors, have been working very hard through this unusual season to keep our projects on track, to continue the work that we do regularly to improve and ultimately restore the water quality of Green Lake. You'll remember that when the DNR declared Green Lake impaired in 2014, that gave the Green Lake Association a strategic focus. We came together and said that our reason to be is to improve the water quality of Green Lake. Cory and Rachel's presentations have outlined a couple of the science-based research projects that we've sponsored with your generous support to give us a better understanding of the issues that Green Lake is facing. It's essential that we understand the scale and scope of those issues before we can finalize our attack plan to fix them. Rachel and Cory's projects, however, are not the only things that we're doing. If you've driven by Highway K and looked at the County K estuary, you may have noticed a series of flotation devices. They're holding up a turbidity curtain, literally a curtain that extends down into the water. This is a pilot project that we've initiated with the Green Lake Sanitary District in an attempt to diminish the wave action, the flow of water, and the access of carp to the native plants that we've planted, giving those plants a chance to do what they do best, which is filter the runoff and the sediment and prevent it from flowing into Green Lake. We have stream restoration. You may have heard us say that we've identified 11 miles of streams that feed into Green Lake that need to be restored. What does restoration mean? That means that a stream has been eroded by heavy running water and is effectively transporting sediment and phosphorus down the stream and into the lake. What restoration means is that we're leveling out the stream banks, creating a floodplain that when heavy rains occur, that the sediment, the phosphorus is soaked into the ground, keeping it on the ground rather than sending it directly into the lake. Important work that the stream restoration is accomplishing. Carp removal, I won't have to remind any of you of what we encountered in 2016 when we had hundreds, thousands of carp washing up on our shore. Since that time, we've been working with the sanitary district to remove carp, thousands of pounds of carp from Green Lake, and that's had the effect of taking phosphorus out of the lake, but also making our shorelines much more pleasant. We have a number of best management practices. The retention ponds, buffer strips are located and installed on agricultural land throughout the watershed, and they're intended to filter and prevent the runoff, again holding phosphorus and sediment on the ground rather than letting it run into the lake. That's the goal of so much of what we do, is keeping the phosphorus on the ground in the farmlands. We've funded agriculture scholarships. The average age of the farm owners in Green Lake County and in the watershed is 66. That means there's clearly going to be a transition to younger farmers, hopefully family members, who'll be taking over family farms. We've sent a number of these young students to conferences and meetings so that they can learn innovative, environmentally friendly agricultural techniques. Rachel and Cory's projects, as well as those I summarized for you, are only possible due to your generous support for the Green Lake Association. When you renew your membership, or in some cases begin a membership with the GLA, when you actively participate and generously support our gala, when you donate to our year-end leadership campaign, that support is critical to us managing this raft of projects that we have underway at any one time. We and our partners depend on your financial support, and we hope we can continue to count on it in this very unusual year. Stephanie mentioned earlier about our first annual virtual gala. We've had a great track record these past few years of hosting so many of you in a person-to-person gala at the Shoreline Boat Center. Lots of fun, lots of music, a very good community togetherness evening, but also a very good fundraising event for the Green Lake Association. Our virtual gala this year, the pandemic is going to give us an opportunity to do it differently, and we're excited about being able to come to you in a different format, share what we've been doing, have some fun, and as Stephanie said, end the evening by shining a light on Green Lake for a brighter future. We hope we can also count on your generous support. Please stay tuned to our website for what you'll learn about the virtual gala on Saturday, August 1st. Finally, thank you again. Thank you for being part of our meeting today. Thank you for your consistent and generous support. Please share this video with friends, family, neighbors that may not have been able to attend. It's important that we all realize that we're in this together. For us to restore this lake, to improve it, preserve it, and eventually restore it, it's going to take the entire Green Lake community, and we're so grateful that you're part of that. Thank you.